welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into, human nature itself. We're going to be looking at Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature, a pretty dense book. But trust me, it's packed with insights that can, really change how you see the world and yourself.
Yeah, this book really goes deep, It's like Greene's trying to give us a manual for decoding human behavior, all the hidden forces and motivations that we usually don't even realize are, running the show.
It's like he's saying we all have this stranger within us. I mean, that's one of the key ideas in the book, these primal emotions, these irrational impulses that we're often, completely blind to.
Right. And he argues that it's these hidden motivations that are behind a lot of the patterns we see in our lives. Those self-sabotaging behaviors, the things we do over and over again, even though we know they're not good for us.
It's like those times you say something and instantly regret it, or you get sucked into some pointless argument online, even though it's just going to make you feel worse.
Exactly. Greene's saying that by understanding this stranger within, we can actually start to get some control over our lives, break free from those cycles.
He's not exactly, a cheery optimist, though, is he? His view of human nature can be, pretty dark at times.
No, not really sugarcoating anything. He's basically arguing that we're all inherently irrational, driven by these primitive emotions, and, a deep, deep need for social validation.
He even says we're all susceptible to manipulation, especially in today's world, with social media and everything.
Yeah, he sees social media as like this amplifier for all our emotional vulnerabilities, making us easy targets for, anyone who understands how to pull those levers.
It's kind of scary when you think about how fast, outrage and misinformation can spread online.
Right, absolutely. And how many people fall for scams and conspiracy theories and stuff like that. It can be pretty unsettling to think about.
For sure. So if we're all so easily influenced, how do we break free? I mean, what's the antidote to all this?
Well, Greene says it starts with awareness. The first step is to just recognize that we have these emotional biases, that we're not as rational as we think we are. He calls this cultivating our inner Athena.
Now, for those of us who maybe slept through Greek mythology class, who's Athena?
Athena is the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. So, she's all about using your head, thinking things through, making smart decisions.
So in Greene's world, she represents that voice of reason, the part of us that can see through the emotional fog.
Right. And he argues that we can train ourselves to tap into that inner Athena.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? How do we start making decisions based on logic and reason instead of just, reacting emotionally all the time?
Well, Greene says it starts with, like I said, recognizing our biases. We all have them, even the smartest people. He uses the 2008 financial crisis as an example, How even really intelligent investors got caught up in what he calls irrational exuberance.
Yeah, I remember that. Everyone was just pouring money into the market, convinced it would keep going up forever.
Right. And they ignored all the warning signs because, they got blinded by greed. Their judgment was totally clouded.
It's like that old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. And Greene's point is that our desires, our wants, can actually distort how we see the world. We start seeing what we want to see, not what's actually there.
Okay, so how do we, break out of that trap? How do we stop letting our emotions call the shots?
Well, he says it's not about denying our emotions, but about learning to observe them without letting them control us. So it's like creating some distance between yourself and your feelings.
Okay, that makes sense. So not suppressing your feelings, but more becoming aware of them.
Right. And he suggests things like journaling and mindfulness practices to help you become more aware of your emotional triggers, the things that tend to set you off.
So basically, it's all about developing a stronger sense of self-awareness, right? Knowing yourself better, understanding your own patterns.
Exactly. The more aware you are of your own emotional landscape, the less likely you are to get swept away by it.
Okay, that's a good starting point. But there's a lot more to unpack here, right? Greene goes into a lot more detail about how to actually apply these ideas in real life.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We've only just scratched the surface. He talks about decoding body language, understanding how to influence people ethically, navigating group dynamics, all sorts of stuff.
And one thing he really dives into is nonverbal communication. He makes a big deal out of that.
Oh, yeah, it's a whole section of the book. And he's basically saying that as kids, we're actually really good at picking up on those nonverbal cues, like facial expressions, body language, that kind of stuff.
But then we grow up and we kind of lose that, right? We start focusing more on the words people say, and we miss all those subtle signals they're giving off.
Right. We get, less intuitive, I guess you could say. And Greene says we need to reawaken that childlike sense of observation, start paying attention to those unspoken messages again.
And he actually breaks it all down for us, like different types of nonverbal signals. He talks about microexpressions, posture, how people use their personal space. It's pretty detailed.
He even gets into the psychology of lying, Gives you some tips on how to spot when someone's trying to deceive you.
Now, I know this might sound a little intense, like we're all going to turn into, human lie detectors or something.
It's not that simple.
Right. I mean, nonverbal communication is complicated. There's no magic formula for reading people's minds. But Greene's point is that if we start paying attention to those subtle cues, we can get a better sense of what's really going on behind the words.
Exactly. It's another layer of understanding, It helps you see the whole picture.
Okay, so that's nonverbal communication. But what about influence? I mean, that's a big part of Greene's work, right? He's got that whole law of influence thing.
Yeah, that's another one of his big ideas. And it all revolves around understanding what he calls people's self-opinion, which is basically their need to feel good about themselves, to see themselves in a positive light.
Right. And Greene's saying that if we understand that need, we can actually, influence people more effectively.
In a way, yeah. He talks about techniques like mirroring, which is, subtly mimicking someone's gestures and language to build rapport.
So basically, you're making them feel like you're on the same wavelength.
Right. And he says it's important to frame your requests in a way that makes people feel like they're in control, Like they're making the decision, not being forced into it.
Now, I know some people hear this and they think, oh, this is all just like manipulation tactics. Isn't this a bit Machiavellian?
Well, yeah, some critics have definitely accused Greene of that, but I think it's more nuanced than that, Influence isn't inherently bad. It depends on how you use it.
Right, like, are you using it to help someone or to exploit them?
Exactly. If you're using these techniques to genuinely connect with people, to help them achieve their goals, then it can be a really positive thing. But if you're just trying to trick people into doing what you want, then yeah, that's not cool.
So it's about intention, really.
Yeah. And Greene also talks about the power of the social force, which is basically how group dynamics can affect us, the way we act differently when we're in a group.
Oh, yeah, like how we might do things in a group that we'd never do on our own.
Exactly. He says that we have this deep need to belong. And that can make us vulnerable to things like groupthink, where we just go along with the crowd even if we don't agree.
Right. Or we don't speak up even if we have doubts because we don't want to rock the boat.
Exactly. And he uses the French Revolution as an example of how, that kind of group energy can get out of control and lead to really extreme, unpredictable outcomes.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful image. And he's saying that understanding those dynamics is important for, anyone who interacts with other humans, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's about being aware of those forces and learning how to navigate them, how to make sure you're not just getting swept along by the crowd.
So it's about having that individual strength, that ability to think for yourself, even when everyone else is doing something different.
Right. But, even with all this talk about the darker side of human nature, the manipulation and the groupthink and all that, Greene does offer some, more hopeful ideas. He's not completely doom and gloom.
Yeah. What's he say about that?
Well, he talks about how confronting our mortality can actually help us appreciate life more, find a greater sense of purpose. Like when we realize that our time is limited, it can make us more focused on what really matters.
That makes sense. I mean, we all know we're going to die someday, but we don't really like to think about it, do we?
Right. But Greene's saying that facing that reality head on can actually be liberating, you know? It can help us break free from those petty worries and anxieties that keep us from really living.
It's like once you accept that you're going to die someday, you can actually start living more fully in the present moment.
Exactly. And he also talks about how true fulfillment comes from, pursuing your own unique path, not from chasing external validation, Like it's not about money or status or what other people think of you. It's about finding what truly matters to you and going after it.
So it's like knowing yourself.
Yeah.
Being true to yourself.
Right. And that can be really hard, especially in a world that's constantly telling us what we should be, what we should want.
Yeah, that's for sure. So it sounds like Greene is saying that like the key to happiness, or at least to like a more fulfilling life, is to really understand ourselves, to embrace our strengths and accept our weaknesses, and then to, go out there and do our own thing.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. Of course, not everyone agrees with everything Greene says, There are definitely some critics out there.
Yeah, I mean, his stuff can be pretty controversial.
Yeah. Some people find his approach Too cynical, too deterministic, like he's saying we're all just robots programmed by our genes and our environment.
Right, like we don't have any free will, we're all just puppets dancing on strings.
Exactly. And they say he focuses too much on the dark side of human nature, like all the manipulation and power games and stuff.
Yeah, and he doesn't really talk much about like altruism or compassion or any of those more positive aspects of human nature.
It's true, he doesn't really dwell on that. But, to be fair to Greene, he's not saying that we're all inherently bad, just that we have these tendencies, these darker impulses that we need to be aware of.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not that he's denying the good stuff, just that he's trying to like shine a light on the stuff we usually try to ignore.
Right. Like he's saying, look, this is the reality of human nature, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's not pretend it's not there.
And his point is that if we understand those darker impulses, those shadow sides of ourselves, then we're less likely to be controlled by them.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, right? The more we understand about how our minds work, the better equipped we are to make good choices.
So even if you don't agree with everything Greene says, I think there's a lot of value in, just wrestling with his ideas, engaging with them.
Oh, absolutely. This book is not a light read. It's dense, it's challenging, but it's also really thought-provoking. And I think it can change how you see the world, how you see yourself.
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, it's like he's saying, hey, look, stop chasing all those external things, like the money, the fame, the approval. None of that's going to make you truly happy.
It's like he's saying, look inside yourself, figure out what makes you tick, what you really value.
And then just go for it.
Yeah. But, like I said, Greene's work isn't for everyone. It can be pretty intense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He definitely ruffles some feathers.
There are definitely some people who think he's way too cynical, Like, he doesn't believe in the good in people at all.
Yeah, like humans are just inherently selfish and manipulative, and that's it.
Right. And they say he's too deterministic, like he doesn't believe in free will or anything like that.
So it's like we're all just, pawns in this game of life, following these predetermined scripts.
Right. And some people, take issue with his focus on the dark side of human nature. They say he doesn't give enough attention to, the positive stuff like altruism and compassion and all that.
Yeah, he doesn't really talk much about that, does he?
Not really, but I think, to be fair, he's not saying that those things don't exist, just that, we have to be realistic about the fact that we all have these darker impulses, too.
So it's not that he's denying the good, just that he's saying, hey, let's not ignore the bad either.
Right, and that's, kind of his whole point, right? If we can understand those darker parts of ourselves, those shadow sides, then we're less likely to be controlled by them.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like, the more you know about something, the less scary it is.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most valuable things about Greene's work, even if you don't agree with all of it. It makes you think, It forces you to confront some uncomfortable truths about yourself and about human nature in general.
Yeah, it's definitely a book that, stays with you. It's not something you just read and forget about.
And even if you, disagree with some of his conclusions, I think there's a lot to be gained from just engaging with his ideas, wrestling with them.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. So if you're looking for a book that'll, challenge you, make you think, maybe even make you a little uncomfortable, then I definitely recommend checking out The Laws of Human Nature.
Yeah, it's a wild ride, but it's worth it.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into the laws of human nature. Thanks for sticking with us. And as always, we encourage you to, go explore the book for yourself, see what you think.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep diving.